Hello all my people, welcome back to the shop. Today I'm going to be making a case, a display case for a baptismal gown. Found some of this, what I believe to be Eastern Red Cedar on the disc golf course. I'm going to chop a little bit of it up and try to mill it into some boards to make for this. Don't really have a good way of doing that except shave off a few slices, try to make it as flat as possible on the surface joiner, and then plane it down to a square. It works okay for pieces under, say, 6 inches square, but anything bigger than that, and it really doesn't work well. I would need a bandsaw or something to do better than that. But I really only need small pieces anyway. This is going to look really good. This wood is streaked with pink and purple and white. Very lovely. Of course, I don't promise to run you through the whole process. I'm going to cut out a lot of sanding. Actually, all the sanding, because who wants to watch that? Well, then again, I would wonder who would want to watch any of this. But you've chosen to click on this for reasons of your own, and I won't question it. Anyway, I actually had 2 pieces of cedar and chopped them both up and realized that they were 2 different species. One was noticeably browner than the other one. Well, I don't know why that should be. They were both on the same disc golf course in Oklahoma. Anyway, I wasn't able to use that, and so I had to use the very thin pieces, making some of the face frame really thinner than I wanted it to be. And so I was unable to cut a slot for the glass, which is what I originally intended, and ended up having to glue it into the back of a recess. And that had its own problems. I'm using just a straight box joint for the corners. I'm going to glue it all together. Once again, cutting out all the sanding. Lots and lots of sanding, obviously. Now, people have asked me, Robert, do you intend to give us another parable? No. No, I don't intend that. First of all, nobody's given me the interpretation of the first parable. So, I don't know that you guys deserve it. And second of all, you don't run the same gag twice. Everybody knows that. You pull the next gag. So here it is. I've written a poem for you. I have promised to lay off the complicated adiaphora likely to reveal division, supralapsarianism, or such things in vogue today, theological minutiae. Yet I will employ with courage sesquipedamental verbiage, while avoiding malastutish usage, which would constitute this huge mistake, or even huger, dread effect of Dunning-Kruger. Here approaches creeping terror of pronunciation error. Ought it to be said minutia? Or minutiae, as would the philological pedantic, or the Latinistic mantic? Then I wonder, how shall I know whether I can claim cogito, or if I unwittingly stole someone's mental property whole, while imagining the muses blessed and have enhanced my uses? Am I now indulging vainly in some foolish and ungainly anti-sacerdotalism with regard to scribal wisdom? Should I leave such art disclosures to accredited composers? Yet, if I should use some loan words from the German, borrowed forwards, sprinkled indiscriminately over stanzas to completely seal the zeitgeist in a bottle, primed with bilinguistic twaddle, if I carefully beleaguer all within this rhyme and meter with a sound sense of decorum, publish as a variorum, and invite severe polemics by a horde of academics, shun prolixity of lection, and preserve a circumspection fitting to the subject's moment. Keep the symbolism potent. Reconsider tone and message. Use chiastical expressage. Force the syllables into the shape of tetrametric trochees, and constrain the viewershipage to those of the mental grippage, vital for appreciation of my lyrical creation. Then, perhaps, the clouds will open, Hearts will lift, and men will hope in beatific understanding, brought about by minds expanding, and awesomatous fruition, owing to this composition. Thank you. Now, if some of those words sounded like they might not have been words, you can just assume they were. After all, I have all of the certifications necessary to know such things. I've clearly studied a lot of dictionaries. Basically all I read nowadays. I hate fiction of all kinds. You understand. Oh, but anyway, back to the case. Here, this is a hanger for the gown itself. There's a gown and a bonnet. And the bonnet's going to be up above the gown, displayed up above the gown. And it's going to hang by a nail or a screw right at the neck of the gown. So that's what that's all about. But speaking of making up words, that actually reminds me of a little interesting thing that I read about Shakespeare. He's got a really long word in one of his works, in Love's Labour's Lost, in which Hamlet's ghost is actually talking to the skull in his hand, or something like that, and they use this word, which is honorificabilitudinatatibus, which everybody knows is Greek. But more importantly, it's also an anagram. And that anagram be rearranged to spell he ludi f baconis nati tuiti orbi, which of course means these plays, F. Bacon's offspring, are preserved for the world, thus proving beyond the shadow of a doubt, once and for all, that Kevin Bacon wrote Shakespeare's plays. And something else interesting, Shakespeare himself was the first one to come up with the famous 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but it meant something different back in medieval times. Back then, if something was 7 degrees, they used different units of measurement. So that was actually 1 pectoral of Kevin Bacon. Not sure how that fits into the anagram, but Kevin Bacon is actually my favorite bacon, except for actual bacon. So it was on my mind. I thought I'd mention that to you. What were we talking about? Oh, yeah, the carpentry. So here I am making the face frame for this case. And I'm just going to line it up with the sides, as one does. Not much to say about that. These pieces are thinner than I had intended. I considered briefly heading back out to the disc golf course to try to find more of this cedar. But that sounded like too much work, so I didn't do that. I think these will probably work just fine. Well, that actually reminds me of something else. Speaking of baptism and disc golf, some of you may know I've been considering starting a new podcast called Casual Water, in which I would play disc golf and discuss theology. Now, the good part about that is that there's plenty of theological disc golfers around. It would be a simple matter to just walk across the course and find 3 or 4 Calvinists behind trees. You could find a Lutheran in the creek. You can find some cessationists at the picnic table waiting to start their round. It's really easy, actually. It's disc golf courses are just lousy with theologians. But the format of this podcast would be to invite guests. And, we could get guest disc golfers out there to discuss theology, kind of keep them on their toes. And then we'd have guest theologians out there to discuss disc golf. I think that sounds like a real winner. Everybody would be engaged. Not they couldn't just jump back into their comfort zone. Although, like I said, those disc golfers really do know a lot about theology. So maybe it wouldn't be hard for them to get into that. Then I thought, we could have a... Oh, yeah, there's carpentry going on. Nobody cares about that. Then I thought I could have a little segment in this podcast in which my brother-in-law, Alexander, attempts to rehabilitate the reputation of the patriarchs. Now, if you don't think the patriarchs need to have their reputations rehabilitated, you clearly haven't heard a sermon in the last 30 years. That's the go-to. Pick out a patriarch who everybody thinks is really great and just rag on them for 20 minutes. Yeah, congregants love that. The name, obviously, has a double meaning. For all you disc golfers out there, casual water is when your disc lands in a creek or a pond or some body of water, but you don't count an out-of-bounds stroke. Instead, you jump in that water and can throw from there to avoid a penalty stroke. And on the theological side, I'm not talking about the sacrament of baptism, but a more general baptism in which we, within our sphere of influence, baptize everything, that is, wash it with the Word, and if it comes out clean, then we have it for use in the kingdom of heaven. And if it doesn't, then it's drowned, and we are well rid of it. We ought to be doing this casually at all times. Oh yeah, also there's some carpentry going on or something. Looks like some spray lacquer and, some picture hanging wire. Yeah, whatever. But speaking of baptism, that reminds me, this is a baptismal gown after all. So another accidental feature that this display case has, made of cedar, is that cedar is rot resistant, which means you can go ahead and dunk that baby and then put that baptismal gown straight back in the case without waiting for it to dry. So that's convenient. Well, I say dunk. This particular gown is for a Lutheran family. And they don't dunk. They kind of pour. Actually, they pour 3 times. And they pour out of a little shell made out of metal. It looks like an oyster shell. Now, why they do that, who can say? If you know the answer to that, if you know why the Lutherans baptize by pouring out of a oyster shell 3 times, you just let me know in the comments. And we'll pick the best one, and you can be on the podcast Casual Water, as long as you are not better at disc golf than I am. Now, if you were paying close attention, you will have seen me just attempt to glue in a piece of plexiglass using silicone caulking. What you may not know is that silicone caulking does not stick to plexiglass, so I ended up having to redo that part with an epoxy, which seemed to work just fine. And now here is the completed project. All hanging on the wall. It's a box. It's got 4 sides, unless you count front and back, in which case it has 6 sides, which is the correct number of sides for a box. The miters turned out really nice. The finish turned out really nice. It's got some good grain in it. One of them looks like Nixon. One of the knots looks like a portrait of Nixon's face. If there's one thing I know about Nixon is that he's got a face that looks like it could be found in some grain of wood.